This is Kaz. Colonel, can you hear me?
Loud and clear. What's the situation?
I'm inside a box.
Okay, your mission is to retrieve information on Project Babel and conduct a review what you find in under 15 minutes.
Project Babel.
Yes. Remember, Metal Gear fans are some of the most passionate out there. You can't risk making a mistake on this mission. If you need me, contact me by Kodak.
Roger that. Over and out. Metal Gear, everyone. The story of the Metal Gear series' early days is one of the most fascinating in all of gaming. In 1986, a young man named Hideo Kojima joined Konami as a video game planner. However, Kojima-san had trouble working in the company, mainly because he wasn't a programmer. He was good at creating concepts and proposing game ideas, but put them into script, he could not. Kojima did help design the game Penguin Adventure, but aside from that, most of his games ended up just getting canned by Konami. Sometime during that same year, Kojima was handed a project for their newest game, a game about military combat. Now, one thing that you have to understand is at the time that Metal Gear was made, most games encouraged destruction and killing in the name of high scores, mainly due to the popularity of arcades at the time. Sure, there were titles like Dragon's Lair, but they were the exception rather than the rule, and Konami was certainly no exception, with games like Gradius and Salamander dominating home consoles and arcades alike. In fact, Intruder, the original name given to Metal Gear, was originally going to be a military combat title. However, development hit a few snags along the way. The hardware used to develop Metal Gear limited the amount of enemies and bullets that could be displayed on screen. Due to these limitations, Kojima decided to develop a game where the objective was to avoid fighting as much as possible, a decision that wasn't very popular within the company, and nearly led to Kojima leaving Konami. But eventually, after some convincing from one of his bosses, he stuck with it and Metal Gear was released on July 7th, 1987 on the MSX2 and paved the way for the stealth genre. Yes, you heard right. Metal Gear started off on the MSX2, not the NES. It's a common misconception that Metal Gear began on the NES since, well, the MSX2 wasn't very popular in North America, and Metal Gear was never released there in its original format, although it did see a release in Europe in September the same year. It's been widely documented that the NES version and its sequel, Snake's Revenge, weren't worked on by anyone from the original team, and they didn't even get the consent of Kojima or any other members that worked on the original before making this port. Hideo Kojima has gone on record several times saying that the NES port was not faithful to the original design, due to the various changes that were made during development. While that is true, it is still an important entry because the NES version is what introduced so many people to the series in the West in the first place. Just not enough to make it a household name at the time. Why am I still wearing this? Despite selling over 1 million copies on the NES and receiving a popular sequel, while Japan received the official follow-up to Metal Gear, the series didn't rise to prominence until 1998 with the release of Metal Gear Solid on the PlayStation, which would forever change the way the games would tell their stories and cement the genre of tactical espionage. Since then, every main installment has adopted the Metal Gear Solid title and continued to capture the hearts of many with its masterful stealth gameplay and stories chock full of shocking twists. Some more shocking than others. And while I personally feel that the series is starting to face overexposure, what with the 2 collector's editions in less than a year, the obsolete 3DS port of Snake Eater, and splitting up Metal Gear Solid 5 into 2 games. By the by, I'm willing to bet that Konami is going to release Metal Gear Solid 5, the complete story, in less than a year. Any takers? I think we can all agree that the Metal Gear series has more than earned its place among the greatest gaming series ever made. So, with all that recognition attached to the series name that it has earned over decades, why is this game never in the discussion for great Metal Gear titles? Released in 2000 on the Game Boy Color, most people know it as Metal Gear Solid, no not that one, but in Japan it was known as Metal Gear Ghost Babel. I'll be referring to it as Ghost Babel henceforth in order to avoid confusion with the PlayStation Classic and because, well, Ghost Babel has the same acronym as Game Boy. See? Ghost Babel? Game Boy. Still, one has to wonder, why was this game called the same thing as the 1998 PlayStation title instead of the far cooler Ghost Babel? Well, supposedly the name change was to better associate the title with Metal Gear Solid. Remember, the series had just exploded in the West a few years back, a bad decision that carried a worse sentiment. See, back then, and even to this day, a handheld title with the same name as a console release invoked the image of a lazy port or a terrible original release that was rushed out the door in order to make a quick buck. Even top developers like Rockstar did this with the very first 2 Grand Theft Auto titles on Game Boy. This sentiment is reflective in Ghost Babel's poor sales, a shame since it wasn't a half-hearted effort by Konami, or so screamed the numerous writers at the time. It was widely beloved by critics, more so in North America than in Japan, where it earned a 31 out of 40 by Famitsu and only sold around 70,000 copies. Thus far, it is also the only Metal Gear title to be exclusive to a Nintendo console. And no, Snake's Revenge does not count. Not only did Kojima not work on it, but it doesn't even have Metal Gear in the title. While Kojima was busy with the development of the next Metal Gear, Sons of Liberty, at the time of Ghost Babel's development, he did write the story and is credited as supervising director. And Kojima's usual position is Shintano Jiri, whose work includes being the assistant director of Police Knots, an earlier work of Kojima's, and designing the horror that is Never Dead.
Mind you, this is before he made Never Dead, but still, it makes you wonder why Konami decided to publish that electronic garbage, and not a game that's already complete, and no, I am never letting that go from them!
The studio behind it was Tose, a company first known for the arcade title Vanguard in the 80s, and the PlayStation ports for the Final Fantasy series and Chrono Trigger in the 90s. They would later go on to make the best underwater levels in the Starfleet series, which we'll get to someday.
So, is Metal Gear Ghost Babel still a shining star of the stealth genre? Or has time not been kind to this ghost of a game? Let's put on our bandanas and find out.
The story is not canon to the main series, but it does take place after the events of the original Metal Gear, and presumably all other titles that preceded it. So I have no choice but to play this clip.
You've created a time paradox.
We good people? The plot has Snake reluctantly come out of retirement 7 years after his mission in Outer Heaven. The fictional country of Gindra has gotten its hands on Metal Gear and plans to use it to win its independence. So naturally, Snake is sent in to stop them. Along the way, Snake must confront a group of mercenaries called the Black Chamber, uncover Project Babel, and the connection between all of this and the events that happened 7 years ago. It takes some time for the mystery to unfold, but without giving away too much, it's very engaging and the mystery is a solid one, with likable characters on both sides accompanying you all the way. Yes, the villains aren't just evil for the sake of being evil. They're misfits who come from a tragic past that want vengeance for what they lost and what they never had, that are misled by their leader, and all happen to have connections to the event of Metal Gear. It's very clever how they connect this first game with an alternate timeline and give every connection a purpose. Even the people of Gindra, the people who are using Metal Gear. All they want is to be recognized as an independent nation, stop their civil war, and not be meddled with by outside forces. Ghost Babel also takes a rather interesting look on the concept of justice and morale, how bad things happen to good people and vice versa, and it ties in well with how Snake became a legend for the horrible things he did in Metal Gear 1 and why he hates the title Legend in this timeline. It does take some time for the points to connect, but when they do, they form a perfect picture of a group of misfits who have one thing in common: a horrible past full of injustice. One final thing noteworthy about the story is that despite the maturity of the plot, Ghost Babel was only given an E by the ESRB. This game got an E, while having references to alcohol, some swear words, the gruesome death of several characters, and Snake's Fogger obviously being, yeah. Not that there's anything that would push it to M, but it's just strange that this all slipped past the ESRB. I guess Kojima just wills it. Ghost Babel's story is a surprising treat, but it's only the beginning to this sweet, sweet stealth adventure. Unlike the PSP Metal Gear games, which, when you get right down to it, are watered-down versions of Snake Eater, Metal Gear Ghost Babel is the evolution of the formula set about by the original 2 Metal Gears, while adding in elements from Metal Gear Solid. You start off with nothing but your bare fist and a fogger to sneak your way around the enemy headquarters. Along the way, you can receive help from and save with your codec, and build up an arsenal of grenades, machine guns, C4s, among many other pieces of equipment you'll need in order to put a stop to Gander, like your trusty cardboard box. It now comes in 3 different colors. Unlike most Metal Gear games, Ghost Babel is divided up into levels, and you can't backtrack between them whenever you please, so missing certain items is possible, but at the same time it's very unlikely that you will. The level design is great, with the latter levels making you use all your wits and equipment in order to progress, but what makes Metal Gear Ghost Babel so great is the same thing that makes all great stealth games great: the stealth equation. Metal Gear Ghost Babel absolutely nails the first half of the stealth equation, making patient actions feel more rewarding than just going in guns blazing, something that is reflected in the score that you're given at the end of each stage. Your patience is always rewarded, more so on higher difficulties where you're given less rations and more enemies to avoid contact with. All of this really helps to make you feel like a stealth operative, especially when you're exploring a compound in the dark, or running through a minefield avoiding enemy fire. And on top of that, it's packed with a ton of content, like the excellent VR missions and even a multiplayer option. The only problem with Ghost Babel is the other half of the stealth equation, making the penalty for failure fair without punishing the player too much as they escape. The punishment for getting caught is often too harsh to match the reward of actually pulling it off, and trying to escape is easier said than done. Aiming long-range weapons up close and trying to escape unscathed is impossible because the controls are just a bit too tight to allow that. Also, switching back to your keycard every time you want to open up a door or hearing the boss's speech when you lose to them for the 50th time gets really annoying, but these are minor nitpicks at best. Aside from failing the escape portion of the equation, it is a masterpiece of tactical espionage. If it isn't considered the handheld king of stealth, then its only competition are the other handheld Metal Gear games. Metal Gear Ghost Babel is one of the finest titles to ever hit the handheld scene, much less the Game Boy Color. Finally, the presentation, which, like the story, is surprising in the best way possible. Character animation is fluent and sprite work for environments are given a ton of attention to detail. The cutscenes are another high point for the game, showing off the stylish art design and the cinematic nature of storytelling Kojima had established with Metal Gear Solid 2 years prior. As for the music, well, nothing here quite matches Snake Eater, but it's all still solid. Credit must go to Takashi Honda and the rest of the sound design because they deliver one of the most incredible soundtracks on the Game Boy Color. In short, Ghost Babel's presentation retains the same level of quality as the rest of this package.
Metal Gear Ghost Babel came out at a different time. A simpler time where Mortal Kombat was the most controversial thing out there, where Rare brought smiles to people's faces instead of frowned, and when Konami came out with masterpieces like this. Unfortunately, while the game has aged like fine wine, getting your hands on a copy has only become more difficult as time has gone by.
As I said earlier, Metal Gear Ghost Babel did not sell very well, and as such is one of the rarest games in the series, not to mention one of the rarest titles on the Game Boy Color. You'll be lucky to find a copy for under $40.
Still, it's all worth it to track down a copy of one of the greatest titles in the series, not to mention the best handheld stealth game you will ever get your hands on. Until next time, game on, my friends. Ow. Snake? Snake! Snake! Oh wait, I can just press continue. There we go.